The clock on the dashboard of his delivery van blinked 11:45 in steady green numbers. For the first time that week, maybe that whole month, he was ahead of schedule. The last package had been dropped off early, and the next one wasn't due across town for another 2 hours. A little window of quiet had opened up in his busy day, and he was stopped at a red light, just a few blocks from the river, when he realized where he was. His daughter's school was only a 10-minute drive away. A smile spread across his face, softening the tired lines around his eyes. He pictured her face, that incredible smile of hers where her whole face crinkled up with joy. He could just see her, sitting in that big cafeteria, probably telling some elaborate story to her friends. The idea popped into his head fully formed. He would surprise her for lunch. The light turned green. Instead of going straight, he turned left, heading toward the little deli he knew she loved. The bell over the door jingled as he walked in. The familiar smells of roasted meats and fresh bread wrapped around him. "2 turkey and cheese on whole wheat, please," he said to the man behind the counter. "Not too much mayo on one. Actually, just put the mayo on the side." He grabbed a bag of apple slices from the cooler and, after a moment's thought, picked up 2 small cartons of chocolate milk. It was her favorite, a simple little treat. Back in the van, he placed the paper bag carefully on the passenger seat. A good, warm feeling settled in his chest. It was the feeling of being a dad, of doing something small and special. His own father had never been able to do things like this, and that made the moment feel even sweeter. He drove the familiar route, the streets lined with old oak trees, their branches stretching over the road. The elementary school looked cheerful in the midday sun. He parked in the visitor spot, grabbed the lunch bag, and walked to the main doors. The school office was a small, busy room with a faded carpet and walls plastered with colorful student artwork. The air smelled like old paper and disinfectant. "Hi there," he said to the friendly woman behind the counter. She had glasses on a chain around her neck. "I'm here to have lunch with my daughter. First grade." "Oh, how lovely," she said, her voice warm. She slid a clipboard toward him. "Just sign in right here, and I'll get you a visitor's pass. You know your way to the cafeteria?" He nodded, writing his name and the time. "I've been there for a few class parties." She handed him a bright orange sticker that said "Visitor." He stuck it on his shirt, right over his heart, and gave her a thank you nod. The hallways were quiet, empty of students, echoing with his footsteps. He could hear the distant, muffled roar of the cafeteria long before he pushed through the double doors. The sound was like a physical wave. 100 young voices talking, laughing, shouting, mixed with the clatter of plastic trays and chairs scraping on linoleum. The light was harsh and fluorescent. He stood there for a second, letting his eyes adjust. Scanning the crowded room, he found her quickly. She was easy to spot in her bright pink shirt, sitting at the far end of a long table. His smile started to grow, but then it faltered. Something about the picture was off. She was at the very edge of the bench. The rest of the kids at her table, 4 or 5 of them, were bunched together at the other end. They weren't exactly facing away from her, but they weren't including her either. She had her little blue lunchbox open in front of her and was eating her sandwich slowly. Her eyes down, his daddy senses, which were always humming in the background, began to ring a little. Maybe they just had a small argument, he thought. Kids that age could be fickle with their friendships. He took a step forward, about to call her name, when movement caught his eye. The lunchroom instructor, a woman he recognized from previous visits, was walking down the aisle between the tables. She was a serious-looking woman with short gray hair, always wearing a whistle around her neck. Her job was to keep the peace. She stopped right at his daughter's table. He watched, his feet rooted to the spot. The woman didn't say anything to the group of kids. She leaned down, putting a hand on the table, and spoke directly into his daughter's ear. From across the room, he couldn't hear a word, but he saw the effect. His little girl's head bowed even lower. She gave a small, silent nod. Then, the instructor did something strange. She picked up his daughter's juice pouch from her lunchbox, looked at it, and placed it back down on the napkin. Then, she reached in and took out the small bag of baby carrots his wife had peeled that morning. She set the carrots down, not next to the sandwich but a few inches away, in a separate little spot. Next came the bag of goldfish crackers. She placed that in a line with the carrots. She arranged the three items, carrots, crackers, juice, in a neat, isolated row, separate from the main lunch. It was such a small, precise action. It looked almost helpful, like she was organizing a messy space. But his daughter's lunch wasn't messy. It was laid out neatly. A cold, thin feeling, like a trickle of ice water, started down his spine. He didn't move. He just watched, the paper bag with the deli sandwiches feeling suddenly heavy in his hand. He stood there by the doors, holding the paper bag. The noise of the cafeteria seemed to fade into a dull buzz in his ears. All he could see was his daughter, sitting quietly, and the instructor's hands moving her food around. The instructor gave a small, satisfied nod and then walked away, continuing her patrol. His daughter didn't touch the food that had been moved. She just ate her sandwich, her movements small and careful. The other kids at the table were laughing about something. A burst of sound that made her glance up quickly before looking back down at her lap that he should walk over. That's what he came to do. Surprise her. Make her smile. But his feet felt stuck to the floor. Something was wrong here, and he needed to understand what it was before he charged in. He didn't want to embarrass her, so he took a small step back, leaning against the wall near a big, colorful poster about the food pyramid, and he just watched. The instructor made her way around the room. She told a table of boys to lower their voices. She helped a little girl open a stubborn yogurt lid. It all looked normal. Then, she approached another table. At this table sat a boy with curly hair and a girl with long braids. They were eating and talking together. The instructor stopped. She did the same thing. She leaned in, said something to them, and then began to inspect and rearrange their lunches. She took a container of grapes from the boy and a bag of chips from the girl and set them apart from their sandwiches, creating that same little line of isolated items. The ice water feeling in his spine turned into a hard, cold stone in his stomach. He scanned the room. His eyes jumped from table to table. He saw a pattern, clear as day once you knew to look for it. The tables in the middle of the room, where most of the kids sat, the instructor just walked by. She might remind them to chew with their mouths closed or to use their inside voices. But she never touched their food. She never rearranged anything. A boy at the center table was happily eating a sloppy Joe, meat sauce smeared from his cheek to his elbow. She just tossed him a napkin with a smile and kept walking. But at the tables around the edges, the tables where the black and brown kids sat, she stopped. Every single time. She would speak to them quietly, her face serious. And then her hands would go into their lunchboxes or onto their trays. A container of rice and beans was shifted to the side. A small bag of plantain chips was lined up next to a juice box. A homemade muffin was placed on a separate napkin. It was never a big production. It was quick, quiet, and looked almost professional, like she was doing her job. But her job wasn't to be a lunchtime food stylist. Her job was to keep order. And then he understood. The understanding hit him like a punch to the chest, stealing his breath for a second. She wasn't organizing the food. She was inspecting it. She was separating the foods she thought were risky, the messy foods, the noisy foods, the foods that, in her mind, might cause trouble or a disruption. The crunchy carrots, the crumbly crackers, the juicy fruits. And she was only doing this to certain kids. She had decided, based on nothing but her own quiet assumptions, which children's lunches were likely to be a problem. She was treating their home-packed food, the food their parents had carefully prepared for them, as if it was suspicious. As if it was less than. He thought about his own hands that morning, rushing to make his daughter's lunch while the coffee brewed. He'd washed the grapes carefully. He'd written a little note on her napkin, a simple drawing of a smiling sun. That lunch was an act of love. And this woman was treating it like a potential crime scene. A hot wave of anger rushed up from his chest, into his throat. It was a sharp, clean rage. He saw his daughter, so small on that big bench, eating her sandwich all alone, her carrots and crackers sitting in timeout for no reason. He saw the proud, careful way she usually packed her lunch, wanting to be just like her mom. This woman's silent message was clear. Your food is different. Your food needs to be controlled. The paper bag in his hand wrinkled as his fist tightened. For a moment, all he wanted to do was storm over there, to knock that whistle off her neck and ask her, loud enough for everyone to hear, what in the world she thought she was doing. But he looked at his daughter. He saw the slump of her shoulders. He knew that causing a huge scene in the middle of the cafeteria would only make it worse for her. It would embarrass her deeply. She'd be the girl whose dad yelled. That wasn't the help she needed. The anger didn't go away. It just changed. It cooled from a boiling rage into a solid, determined weight. It settled inside him, heavy and clear. He couldn't let this slide. Not for one more lunch period. But he had to be smart about it. He had to be calm. For his little girl's sake, he took a deep, slow breath, forcing the tightness in his jaw to relax. He pushed himself off the wall. He wasn't hiding anymore. He walked forward, his steps slow and deliberate, cutting a path through the crowded cafeteria straight toward his daughter's table. His eyes were locked not on her, but on the instructor, who was now hovering near the trash cans, watching the room with her hands on her hips. His footsteps felt heavy on the cafeteria floor, each one thumping in time with his heartbeat. He kept his eyes on the instructor. The noise of the kids around him seemed to blur and fade, like he was walking through a thick fog. All he could see was her, and beyond her, his daughter sitting alone. His little girl saw him first. Her head, which had been bowed down, snapped up. Confusion flashed in her big, brown eyes. Then, a flicker of that bright smile he loved started to break through. It was the smile he'd been picturing in the van. But it didn't last. It faltered as it met his eyes. She could always read his face. She saw the tight line of his mouth, the way his brows were drawn together. Her own smile faded, replaced by a look of worried questioning. The instructor turned, following the little girl's gaze. Her expression shifted smoothly from watchful supervisor to polite, professional welcome. She even managed a small, tight smile of her own. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice cutting through the din. She took a few steps toward him, blocking his direct path to the table. "This is a nice surprise. We don't often get lunchtime visitors." He stopped a few feet from her. He had to look down slightly to meet her eyes. He forced himself to nod, to unclench his jaw just enough to speak. His voice came out lower and calmer than he felt. "Wrapped up my work early. Thought I'd come by." "That's wonderful," she said, her hands now clasped in front of her. Her eyes flicked to the wrinkled paper bag in his hand. "I'm sure she'll be thrilled." But her body language said something else. She stood firmly between him and the table, like a gatekeeper that he didn't move. He just held her gaze. "What were you doing just now?" he asked. The question was quiet, almost flat. Her smile tightened at the corners. "Pardon me?" He gestured with his chin toward his daughter's spot. "At the table, with her lunch. What were you doing?" A wave of understanding and a flash of irritation passed over her face. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that. Just helping them stay organized. You know how first graders can be. They get excited, things get messy, and before you know it, we have spills or crumbs everywhere. I was just setting things up to minimize the mess." She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like she was sharing a handy teacher trick. He slowly looked past her, over to the central table where the boy with the sloppy Joe was now laughing, a big smear of ketchup on his chin. He looked back at her. "I see. So you were organizing her food to prevent a mess." "Exactly," she said, her voice gaining a little confidence. "It's a preventive measure. We like to keep a tidy lunchroom. It's for everyone's benefit." He took a single step to the side, trying to see his daughter fully. The instructor subtly shifted, still partly in his way. His little girl was watching them, her sandwich forgotten in her hands. She looked small and scared. He focused on the instructor again. He picked his words carefully, like he was choosing stones from a riverbed. "My daughter's carrots and crackers. They're especially messy, are they?" She blinked. "Well, carrots can crunch. Crumbs, you know?" He nodded slowly, as if considering this. Then he pointed, his finger aiming across the room. "What about him? He pointed to the boy with the sloppy Joe. His whole tray is a mess. Ketchup on his face on the table. Did you organize his lunch to prevent that? The instructor's face went still. The polite mask slipped for just a second, showing a flash of real annoyance underneath. She glanced over at the boy, then back. That's different. He got a hot lunch from the school. It's a known item. A known item, he repeated, his voice still low. So the school's sloppy Joe is a known item. But my wife's homemade carrots are an unknown risk? Is that it? Her cheeks flushed a light pink. Sir, I think you're misunderstanding. My job is to supervise all the children equally. That's what I'm watching you do, he said. And now he let a little of the steel into his tone. I've been watching you for 10 minutes. You walk past the middle tables. You talk, you remind, you smile. But you only touch the food at the tables on the edges. You only organize the lunches of the Black and Latino children. Every single time. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd said it calmly, clearly, like stating a simple fact. But in the space around them, a strange quiet had fallen. A few kids at nearby tables had stopped talking to watch. A teacher's aide by the milk cartons was staring. The instructor's mouth opened, then closed. The flush on her neck deepened. That is a very serious accusation, she hissed, her voice low now too. I treat every child the same. You don't, he said, shaking his head slowly. He felt strangely calm now. The hot anger had solidified into this cold, clear certainty. You're treating their food differently. And when you single out a child's food, the food their family packed for them, you're sending a message. You're telling my daughter that what she brings from home is wrong, that it needs to be checked, that it's not as good as what the other kids have. He finally moved, stepping around her completely. He walked the last few feet to the table and knelt down on the linoleum floor, putting himself at his daughter's eye level. The paper bag crinkled as he set it down. Hey, sunshine, he said, his voice softening into something real for the first time since he'd entered the room. Her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. Daddy? Are you in trouble? His heart broke a little at that. No, baby. No trouble. He reached out and gently swept the bag of carrots and the goldfish crackers back next to her sandwich, undoing the instructor's neat little line. I just brought you a better dessert. Chocolate milk. A tiny, wobbly smile touched her lips. Behind him, he could feel the instructor's furious stare burning into his back. He could hear her sharp footsteps as she marched away, probably toward the principal's office. He didn't care. He opened the bag, pulled out the chocolate milk, and slid it toward his daughter. So, he said, sitting down on the bench next to her, his big frame crowding out the loneliness. Tell me about your morning. Did you finish that drawing of the rocket ship? As she began to talk, her voice gaining strength, he put an arm around her small shoulders. He wasn't leaving. The real conversation, he knew, was just about to begin. But for these few minutes, the most important thing in the world was right here, drinking chocolate milk and finally smiling. He sat on the hard bench, his arm a warm, steady weight around his daughter's small shoulders. She was telling him about the rocket ship drawing, her words tumbling out a little too fast, her eyes still darting nervously toward the cafeteria doors. He listened, nodding, making little sounds of agreement, but his own senses were tuned to the room around them. The quiet that had fallen during his talk with the instructor was gone, replaced by the normal roar. But he could feel other eyes on them. The teacher's aide was now whispering to another staff member by the juice machine. A few of the kids at the far end of the table were sneaking curious glances their way. His daughter felt it too. She leaned into his side, her voice getting quieter. She doesn't like my lunch, his little girl murmured suddenly, abandoning the story about the rocket. He looked down at her. What do you mean? The lunch teacher. She always comes. She moves my stuff. She says. His daughter's lower lip trembled slightly. She says things like, let's keep this tidy, or we don't want ants, do we? But she only says it to me and to Jordan and to Layla. She named the two other children he had seen at the separate tables. The cold, Hard weight in his stomach grew heavier. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a pattern. A routine humiliation. How long has she been doing that, sweetie? She shrugged a small shoulder. A while. Since after winter break. I think. Months. The anger threatened to surge back, hot and sharp. He took a slow breath, focusing on the feel of her hair under his chin. You know there's nothing wrong with your lunch, right? Mom makes those carrots perfect. Your goldfish are the best. She gave a tiny nod, but she didn't look convinced. The message had been received, loud and clear, and it had sunk deep before he could say more. He saw movement from the corner of his eye. The cafeteria doors swung open. It wasn't the instructor who walked back in. It was the principal, a man with a kind, tired face and glasses, followed by the instructor herself. Her expression was pinched and tight, her arms crossed. The principal's eyes scanned the room and landed on them. He offered a small, professional smile and started weaving through the tables toward them. The lunchroom noise seemed to dip again. This was it. Dad? His daughter whispered, her small hand gripping his shirt. It's okay, he said softly, giving her shoulder a squeeze. It's all going to be okay. The principal arrived at their table. Hello, he said, his voice calm. I'm Mr. Reynolds. I understand you had some concerns you wanted to discuss. He didn't stand up. He stayed seated on the bench, keeping that physical connection with his daughter. He looked up at the principal, then at the instructor standing stiffly a few steps behind him. I do, he said, his voice even. But not here. He glanced at his daughter, then at the other children who were now openly staring. This isn't a conversation for a cafeteria, and my daughter's lunchtime shouldn't be a spectacle. Mr. Reynolds followed his gaze and understood immediately. A look of regret passed over his face. You're absolutely right, of course. He turned to the instructor. Ms. Gable, can you please oversee the lunch period for the remainder of the time? I'll be in my office. Ms. Gable's lips pressed into a thin line, but she gave a short, sharp nod. The principal looked back at him. Would you like to join me now? Your daughter is welcome to come along, or she can finish her lunch here with her friends. He looked down at his little girl. Her eyes were wide. Do you want to come with me? Or stay and finish your chocolate milk with everyone? Come with you, she said instantly, clinging to him. She wasn't leaving his side. Okay, he said. He gathered their things, the half-eaten sandwiches and the empty milk carton, back into the paper bag. He stood up, taking her hand in his. Her small fingers locked tightly with his. The walk out of the cafeteria felt long. He was aware of every glance, every whisper. He kept his eyes forward, his head high, his grip on his daughter's hand firm and reassuring. They walked down the quiet hall, the principal leading the way to his office. Once inside, Mr. Reynolds gestured to a small round table with chairs. Please have a seat. Would you like some water? He shook his head, helping his daughter into a chair before sitting down himself. The office was warm, covered in student artwork and framed diplomas. It felt like the opposite of the noisy, chaotic cafeteria. Mr. Reynolds sat across from them, folding his hands on the table. First, let me apologize for any disruption to your lunch, he began. Now, can you tell me, in your own words, what happened? He took a moment. He wanted to get this right. He started from the beginning, from deciding to come for a surprise visit. He described exactly what he saw, not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. I saw your lunch instructor rearrange my daughter's food. She set certain items apart in a line. I watched her. For 10 minutes, I watched her do this only to the children of color in the room. She did not touch or rearrange any other child's food. Not one. He spoke calmly. He mentioned the boy with the sloppy Joe. He mentioned the conversations he'd had with his daughter just now, about the comments and the duration of this behavior. He didn't raise his voice. He just presented the facts, one after the other, like laying stones on a path. When he finished, the principal was quiet for a long moment. He looked troubled. He looked over at the little girl, who was tracing a pattern on the table with her finger. And how does that make you feel? When Ms. Gable does that to your lunch? He asked her gently. She didn't look up. Her voice was a shy whisper. Bad. Like my food is dirty. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. The principal closed his eyes for a brief second, a pained look on his face. He sighed, a heavy sound. I want to thank you, Mr. Reynolds said, looking back at him. Thank you for bringing this to my attention directly, and for doing so with such care for your daughter. He paused, choosing his words. What you've described, it is unacceptable. It is a failure of our duty to provide a safe and equal environment for every student. I cannot apologize enough to you, and especially to your daughter, for what she has experienced. He listened, watching the principal's face. He believed the man was sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. What happens now? He asked. The principal leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation clear on his face. What happens now? He repeated quietly, more to himself than to them. He looked from the father's steady gaze to the little girl, who was now quietly nibbling on one of the carrots from the crumpled lunch bag. First, the principal said, focusing on the girl, I want you to know that you did nothing wrong. Your lunch is perfect. The way your family packs it for you is perfect. And you should never, ever feel bad about it. Ms. Gable was wrong. Do you understand that? The little girl gave a small, uncertain nod, her eyes big and round. Good, the principal said. His voice was kind but firm. He then turned his attention back to the father. Now, for the immediate steps. Ms. Gable will be relieved of her lunchroom duties, effective immediately. She will not be in the cafeteria for the remainder of the day, or until we have resolved this completely. The father gave a single, slow nod. It was a start, but it was just a start. Taking one person out of one room didn't fix the thinking that put her there in the first place. The conversation I will have with her will be serious and documented. The principal continued. But this isn't just about one staff member on one day. You helped me see a pattern I was blind to. For that, I am both grateful and ashamed. He paused, steepling his fingers. We have professional development days. Training. Usually it's about new math curriculums or internet safety. Next week, it's scheduled for a workshop on literacy tools. He shook his head slightly. I am going to cancel that. Instead, I will be bringing in an expert on implicit bias, specifically in educational settings. Every single person who works in this building, teachers, aides, cafeteria staff, even myself, will be required to attend. We will start with what happened here today without names as a case study. We need to understand how these quiet, daily acts of differentiation cause real harm. The father felt some of the tightness in his chest begin to ease. This was moving beyond punishment toward something that felt like real change. And the other children? He asked. The other kids she's been doing this to for months? Their parents should know. You're right, the principal said without hesitation. They absolutely should. I will be calling the parents of every child in that lunch period today. I will explain, in general terms, that a concerning pattern of behavior was brought to my attention, that it has been addressed, and that we are taking school-wide steps to ensure it never happens again. I will invite them to speak with me personally if they or their child have any concerns. For the children directly affected, like your daughter, I would like to have a follow-up meeting with you and them, if you're willing, to apologize directly and hear their experience. This was more than he had expected. The man wasn't dodging or making excuses. He was facing it head-on. What about her? The father asked, glancing down at his daughter. She has to come back to this lunchroom tomorrow. The principal nodded. She does, and I want to make sure it feels like a safe, happy place for her again. If it's okay with you, he said, looking at the girl, I would like to have lunch with you tomorrow. Just you and me. We can sit at any table you want. We can talk about rocket ships, or we can sit quietly. But I want you to see that the principal of this school is in your corner. That this is your school, too, just as much as anyone else's. The little girl looked up at her dad, a question in her eyes. He smiled down at her, a real one this time, and gave her hand a squeeze. I think that's a pretty good idea, he said softly. Okay? she whispered, a tiny spark of something. Maybe curiosity, maybe pride, returning to her voice. The principal stood up. I am going to go speak with Ms. Gable now. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. The bell for next period will ring in about 15 minutes. The father stood as well, shaking the principal's offered hand. The grip was firm. Thank you for listening, the father said. No, the principal replied, his expression solemn. Thank you for seeing what I didn't, and for having the courage to walk in here and tell me about it. You protected your child, and in doing so, you may have protected many others. After the principal left, closing the door softly behind him, the office was quiet. The father sank back into his chair, letting out a long, slow breath. The fight was leaving his body, replaced by a deep, weary relief. Dad? His daughter said, scooting her chair closer to his. Are you still mad? He looked at her, really looked at her. The fear in her eyes was fading, replaced by her normal, bright curiosity. He reached out and smoothed her hair. Not mad, baby. Not anymore. I think Mr. Reynolds is a good man who's going to try to fix things. Are you in trouble for yelling? She asked, her brow furrowed with worry. He almost laughed. A soft, choked sound. I didn't yell, remember? I just used my words. Strong, clear words. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. She seemed to think about this, kicking her feet softly under the table. Can I have the other chocolate milk? She finally asked. He laughed for real this time, the sound warm in the quiet room. He pulled the second carton from the bag and pushed it across the table to her. As she poked the straw in, he watched her. The invisible weight she'd been carrying since winter break seemed a little lighter. They sat there in the peaceful office, drinking their chocolate milk together, not as a sneaky treat anymore, but as a small, sweet celebration. The hardest part was over. The work of healing for his daughter and for that whole cafeteria was just beginning. The walk back to the van was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It wasn't heavy with anger or buzzing with tension. It was a soft, thoughtful quiet. His daughter held his hand, swinging their clasped arms gently as they crossed the school parking lot. The sun felt warm on their faces. He opened the passenger door for her, and she climbed up into the big seat, buckling herself in with the serious concentration she always used. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and just sat for a moment, the keys dangling from his fingers. You okay, sunshine? He asked, looking over at her. She nodded, staring out the windshield. Mr. Reynolds is nice, she said after a minute. Yeah, he agreed, starting the engine. I think he is. They drove for a little while, the familiar streets of their neighborhood passing by. He could see her thinking, her little face working through everything that had just happened. Will Ms. Gable get fired? She asked, her voice small that he considered his words carefully. I don't know, he said honestly. That's not really for me or you to decide. What's more important is that she learns why what she did was wrong, so she never does it to another kid again. And that everyone else at the school learns, too. She seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. Jordan and Layla, too? They learn. His heart squeezed. Even in all this, she was thinking of the other kids. Yeah, baby. Jordan and Layla, too. They're going to make sure everyone is treated fairly. She was quiet again, watching the houses go by. Then she said, I'm glad you came to lunch. The simple words hit him right in the chest. He reached over and gave her knee a little squeeze. Me too, kiddo. Me too. When they got home, her mother was in the kitchen, unloading the dishwasher. She turned, a question already on her face. He wasn't due back for hours. She took one look at him, then at their daughter's thoughtful expression, and set a glass down slowly. What's going on? Is everything okay? He shared a look with his little girl. Why don't you go start your rocket ship drawing? He suggested. I'll tell Mom all about our adventure. She scampered off to her room, the immediate drama already fading into the background of her day, replaced by the important business of crayons and paper. He leaned against the kitchen counter and told his wife everything. From the surprise decision to visit, to the cold dread of watching the scene unfold, to the confrontation, the walk to the office, and the principal's promises. He didn't leave anything out. As he spoke, he saw her expression shift from confusion to disbelief, then to a fierce, protective anger that mirrored his own earlier rage. "She's been doing that for months?" she whispered, her hands clenched on the edge of the counter. "Making our baby feel like her food is something to be ashamed of?" He nodded, the reality of it hitting fresh, seeing the pain in his wife's eyes. "Yeah, but listen, the principal, he gets it. He's not making excuses. He's taking real steps." He outlined the plan. The immediate removal from duty, the calls to parents, the mandatory training for the whole staff. He told her about the principal's offer to have lunch with their daughter tomorrow. His wife listened, her anger gradually softening into cautious hope, then into a weary kind of relief. She came over and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his shoulder. "You stood up for her," she murmured. "You saw it and you didn't let it go." "I had to," he said into her hair, holding her tight, the look on her face. They stood like that for a long minute, drawing strength from each other. The kitchen was quiet, filled with the ordinary sounds of the refrigerator humming and a distant lawnmower from down the street. The world hadn't ended. It had just gotten a little more complicated, and in some small way, maybe a little more just. Later that evening, after their daughter was in bed, the principal called just as he'd promised. He spoke to both parents on speakerphone. He reiterated his apology, confirmed that the lunchroom instructor was on administrative leave pending a full review, and informed them that he had already begun making the difficult calls to the other families. He sounded tired, but resolute. "I know an apology can't erase the experience." The principal's voice came through the phone, clear and earnest. "Our job now is action. The training specialist is booked for next Thursday. We will be sending a letter home to all families explaining the focus of our upcoming professional development, to be transparent about our commitment to equity." When the call ended, the father and mother looked at each other across the quiet living room. The television was off. The only light came from a single lamp. "It's more than I thought would happen," his wife said, tucking her feet under her on the couch. "It is," he agreed. "But we have to stay on it. We have to make sure it all happens, and that it sticks. For her." He thought about the next day and the day after that. He thought about the other children, Jordan and Layla, and what their parents must be feeling tonight after getting that call. He thought about the instructor, sitting in her own home, facing the consequences of her unthinking actions. It wasn't a happy thought, but it wasn't a vengeful one either. It was just a fact. Actions had ripple effects. Most of all, he thought about his little girl, asleep in her bed, her drawings of rocket ships scattered on her desk. He hoped she was dreaming of flying, high above everything, where no one could ever make her feel small. His job, he knew, was to help build a world down here that deserved her when she landed. The next morning, the father watched his daughter get ready for school with a new kind of attention. She packed her lunchbox with her mother, carefully choosing her snacks. He saw the slight hesitation in her small hands as she reached for the bag of baby carrots. Her mother, without a word, gently took the bag from her, placed it in the lunchbox, and gave it a little pat. "Perfect," her mother said, with a smile that didn't waver. The little girl looked up, saw her father watching from the doorway, and gave him a tiny, brave smile back. He drove her to school, the usual chatter filling the car. She talked about everything except the cafeteria. He didn't push. He just listened, letting the normal rhythm of their morning hold them. When they pulled up, he put the van in park and turned to her. "Remember, Mr. Reynolds is having lunch with you today. That's pretty special, huh?" She nodded, playing with the strap of her backpack. What if the other kids think it's weird?" He thought for a second. "You know, I bet some of them will think it's cool. The principal choosing to have lunch with you? That's like having lunch with the captain of the ship. Besides," he added, leaning closer, "you get to pick the table. Any table you want." That seemed to settle her. She gave him a quick hug and hopped out, joining the stream of children flowing into the building. For him, the day dragged. His deliveries felt longer, the traffic seemed heavier. His mind kept drifting back to the school, wondering how her morning was going, what the feeling in the building was like after the principal's calls to other families. Finally, just after noon, his phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from his wife. It was a picture. He pulled over to look. It was a photo, maybe taken by a teacher or the principal's phone. It showed the school cafeteria. His daughter was sitting at a table right in the very center of the room. And next to her, wearing a tie and a slightly awkward but genuine smile, was Mr. Reynolds, the principal. They were both eating sandwiches. And on the other side of his daughter was a boy with curly hair, Jordan. And across from her was a girl with long braids, Layla. They were all at the same table talking. Not at the edges. Right in the middle. He stared at the picture for a long time, his throat feeling tight. It was such a small thing. Just 4 people at a table. But it wasn't small at all. It was everything. When he got home that evening, his daughter was a burst of energy. She ran to him as he came through the door. "Dad, you'll never guess what happened." He scooped her up. "What happened?" "Mr. Reynolds let me pick the table, so I picked the biggest one in the middle. And then Jordan asked if he could sit with us because his mom said the principal was a good guy. And then Layla came too. And Mr. Reynolds didn't touch anybody's food. He had an apple and he ate the whole thing. Core and everything. It was so weird." She was breathless, her words tumbling over each other. He listened, laughing at her imitation of the principal eating an apple core. The shadow that had been in her eyes since winter break was gone. Completely gone. Over the next week, things changed, slowly but surely. The lunchroom instructor, Ms. Gable, did not return. A new, younger aide supervised lunch, and she mostly helped kids open stubborn containers and reminded them to clean up their areas, moving from table to table without pattern or prejudice. The father kept his promise to himself to stay on it. He attended the meeting with the principal and the parents of Jordan and Layla. It was a quiet, somber gathering, but there was a powerful sense of shared purpose. They were all there for the same reason, to make sure their children felt whole and welcome in a space that should have always been safe. The school-wide training happened. The father didn't attend, it was for staff. But the principal sent a summary letter home to every family. It talked about implicit bias, microaggressions, and creating a culturally responsive environment. Big words, but the core message was simple. Paying attention to the small things that make big differences. A few weeks later, on a Friday, the father showed up at the school for lunch again. This time it was planned. He signed in, got his visitor sticker, and walked to the cafeteria doors. He paused, a flicker of the old anxiety touching him. He took a breath and pushed through. He scanned the room. He saw his daughter immediately. She wasn't at the edge. She was at a round table near the window, surrounded by a group of friends. Jordan and Layla were there, and a few other kids too. They were all talking and laughing. A banana peel was being used as a pretend telephone. Crumbs were definitely on the table. It was perfectly, wonderfully messy. He walked over. She saw him and waved, her mouth full. "Dad, you came." "I brought backup cookies," he said, holding up a bag. He pulled up a chair and squeezed in at the table. He passed out the cookies. He listened to the chaotic, silly conversations of first graders. He watched his daughter, now the center of a group, not isolated from one. She was confident, joyful, completely at home as he sat there. Surrounded by the beautiful, noisy chaos of a happy lunchroom, he understood. The victory wasn't in a single confrontation or a fired employee. The victory was in this ordinary scene right here. It was in his daughter's easy laugh. It was in the uninspected, enjoyed mess of a shared meal. It was in the simple, profound fact that her lunchbox, and the love it carried, was just a lunchbox again. Not a symbol, not a problem, just food for a growing girl. The work wasn't over. He knew the world held other lunchrooms, other subtle messages. But here, in this room, a correction had been made. The silence had been broken, and in its place was the best sound in the world. His child and others like her, being exactly who they were, completely unafraid.